The 2024 Atlanta Braves season is over. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today for Thursday, October 3rd. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. Follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. He's Christian Rauh. Follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. Tell him how good his new haircut looks. You can find all of our written work, bravestoday.com. And you may notice we sound a little bit more subdued, or I sound a little more subdued than usual this morning. The Atlanta Braves obviously drop game 2 of the National League Wildcard 5-4 to the San Diego Padres. The Atlanta Braves season is over. They are eliminated. Padres move on to face the Dodgers, and what's going to be a really good series over the weekend. Christian, I want to get into the big overarching storylines from this season. I want to get into what happened yesterday. I want to get into what Atlanta has to work on in the offseason and all of that. But before we do that, I think, and I'm going to ask you in just a second, but I think first, I just want to clarify that I'm not disappointed in being eliminated from the postseason, right? It's obviously you don't love being knocked out in your first round matchup for the third consecutive year. But this year, I'm still treating this differently from the past two. Yes, obviously the offense underperformed all year. We know that. Yes, you had injuries impacted the pitching for a third consecutive year, and we'll break that down in a few minutes. But unlike the last 2 years, there were numerous times during the season when Atlanta was on the outside looking in of a playoff spot. They clinched a playoff spot in game 162. They were the very last team to officially make the field. And so, unlike those other seasons to me, those other postseason matchups were underperforming after an amazing regular season where you looked to be the World Series favorite. And this year was not that. This year was you had to battle pretty historic adversity to make it into the postseason at all. And you made it in. And if things broke right, you had the potential to make a run, but you had a lot to overcome. And you ran into a buzzsaw of what I think might be the best team in the National League in the Padres. I'm bummed the team is eliminated because I wanted more Braves baseball, selfishly. I'm not disappointed because the fact remains, really, you shouldn't have been here anyway. You had no right to be in the postseason. There was a stat that came out from OptaStats on Monday night. Atlanta's the first team in modern MLB history to make the postseason with 3 opening day starters all being on the injured list and missing the last 35 games of the year. And that's Ronald Acuna Jr., Spencer Strider, and Austin Riley's who they used for that stat. And that doesn't even really describe how bad the injuries were for Atlanta this year. The opening day lineup got 7 innings together. Sean Murphy got hurt in the 7th inning of that game 1 opener in Philly, and they never all were on the field together the entire rest of the season. I'm bummed. I'm not disappointed. What about you?
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it because you're right. How many injuries do we have all season long? And Spencer Strider, Ronald Acuna Jr., Austin Riley, Michael Harris was out for a while. Sean has mentioned Murphy. There's a lot of things that went wrong with this team. And even though they tried to run it back, they were pretty aggressive at the trade deadline. Maybe not as aggressive as you thought, but they were still pretty aggressive, bringing in Soler and a couple other pieces. Yeah, you can't be too upset. The reason they made the postseason, Lindsay, is because of 3 guys that were DFA'd from other squads that turned into the goon squad for the Braves and helped them step up. There's a lot of pieces that fell into place to help them get this far. And obviously, it just didn't work out to make it any farther. I will say it, and I absolutely agree with you. The San Diego Padres, I think, are the toughest team in the National League right now. That series this weekend is going to be insane. So congratulations to the San Diego Padres. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for the Padres to make it to the World Series. I want to see what they do because they played great. Those fans were electric. They sold out and they broke the record at Petco Park in game 1, and then they broke it again 24 hours later in game 2. Really crazy. But when you look at this lineup, Lindsay, what they put in game 2, the final lineup of the season, if you look at the bottom of the lineup, with Orlando Arcia, with Gio Urshela, with whoever you had catching, in this case with Sean Murphy. If you compare that to 2021 World Series team, and I'm not going to compare this team to that too often because I don't think that's fair, but if you want to do it in just this case for playoffs, the bottom of the lineup in 2021 had Ozzy Albies at 8, had Dansby Swanson at 9. You had so much more depth, and injuries was the biggest reason why you couldn't do that this season. So I think you got to find a place to hang your hat for the Atlanta Braves this year. You made it to the postseason. It's unfortunate that you couldn't get to the division round series. You couldn't win a postseason round, something that you haven't done since winning the World Series. But there's a lot of hopeful things to carry into the offseason, a lot of good things that we can talk positively about this team heading into the offseason, and we will definitely be doing that here on the show.
Yeah, this show's not going away now that the season's over. Don't worry about that, folks. Yeah, I was writing takeaways during the game, and at one point I had to delete it, but at one point I had the note in there that the bottom 3 of the lineup had not gotten on base in that game. Orlando Arcia finally gets on in the 8th inning via base hit. Michael Harris drives him in as part of that 3-for-4, everything but a triple, just put the team on his back. Michael Harris thing there. He heard all your comments about it being bad in the postseason, and he made up for it this year. I do want to, I mentioned this when I was giving my little opening thing there. This is the 3rd consecutive season where injuries have impacted your pitching, or availability has impacted your pitching when you got to the postseason. If you remember back to 2022, Max Fried was coming off of a stomach virus. He had lost like 10 or 15 pounds, which he's not a big dude. Doesn't have a ton of doesn't have a ton of weight to lose. Yeah. And he got blasted by Philly. Spencer Strider was coming off of an oblique injury. He got blasted by Philly in that loss. And then last year, you had Charlie Morton unavailable because of, I think it was like a ruptured tendon in his finger, the finger sprain, whatever it was. You had Max Fried dealing with a blister. He had made, I think, 1 or 2 starts in the entire month of September because they kept trying to get that finger taken care of. And you end up having to throw Bryce Elder and AJ Smith-Shawver in game 3, and they got blasted. And then this year, Chris Sale being hurt, not being on the wild card roster, not even making the trip to San Diego so that he could get treatment and aggressively try to get back where he could potentially perform for you. And then because of all of the other doubleheader and all that stuff, you had to go with an 8th option, AJ Smith-Shawver. And then Max Fried in last night's game, and I hate that potentially his final game in Atlanta ended the way he did. He takes that line drive from Fernando Tatis Jr. off the hip. I'm trying to pull up how fast that was.
I think you said it was 105. I think
it was like 105 off the bat. Takes it off of the hip, glute kind of area there. Finishes the inning, gets out of the inning, but in the 2nd inning gets 2 quick outs. Kyle Higashioka hits his 2nd home run of the series, which was just, I don't know, very annoying that he was the world beater of Atlanta. This dude in the regular season, he hit 17 homers and batted .220. And then in the postseason, he goes 2 for 5 with 2 homers. And it's, come on, man. But that started just a streak for Fried. Arise singles, Tatis singles, Profar singles, Machado doubles, Merrill triples before Bogarts gets out of it. And of all of the hits charged to Max Fried, which it was 8 hits, 5 runs, 8 hits, no walks, 2 strikeouts. 4 of those 8 hits didn't leave the infield. Just one of those frustrating games where he said after the game, the glute kind of tightened on him after getting hit. It started to really bother him in that 2nd inning. That's why they pulled him after 2. Not because he gave up 5 runs. They pulled him because he wasn't able to pitch effectively. He said, I was missing everything middle, and obviously that's a terrible place to leave your pitches. It's frustrating that for all of the work this team has done to build pitching, to have 3 consecutive postseason series impacted by pitching availability is frustrating. I'm not saying that's why Atlanta lost. San Diego fans, don't come at me. You guys were awesome, both the fans and the team. 10 times out of, or probably 8 times out of 10, San Diego wins this series. Let's not mince words here. but it's frustrating to see pitching impacts like this 3 consecutive years when Atlanta's gone so out of their way to try to keep guys healthy for October.
Yeah. No notes on that. I will say that once Max Fried did leave the game, and it was unfortunate that he had to leave after 2 innings, I'm with you because I'm one of those believers that think that we did just see the last start of Max Fried as an Atlanta Brave. I do think
Yeah.
that. We'll get into that more in another episode, I'm sure, later on this week or next week. But
Yeah.
the rest of the bullpen looked really good, though. And that's something that you got to give a little tip of the cap to, especially Daisabel Hernandez. I thought
Golly.
I thought he was fantastic, and I hope that what we have seen from him since he's been called up in September, it means that he gets a more important role heading into 2025. I think he's earned that, and especially in last night's outing.
Yeah, he goes 2 1/3 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts. He's always had a little bit of a higher walk rate, which is, I think, it's been one of the big concerning things for Atlanta. But he seemed to be pretty in control until he just started to run out of gas kind of late there. Dylan Lee covered 1 2/3. Hernandez did again 2 1/3. The bullpen as a whole, those two, Pierce Johnson, Joe Jimenez, 2 runs. I'm sorry, 2 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, no runs. Second straight game where the bullpen was fantastic. And I put this in the takeaways on your note. I think Daisabel Hernandez is going to be in the bullpen next year. I think this might be the last or the first offseason in a while where you don't really see Atlanta have to make moves to reinforce the bullpen. It was something where 2 years ago they had to go and like they traded for Joe Jimenez. They signed Kenley Jansen previous off seasons. Last year, they re-signed Joe Jimenez and Pierce Johnson. Like they've done a lot of work every offseason, it feels, to try and and they traded for Aaron Bummer. They really have done a lot of work to supplement the bullpen every offseason. And it feels like this is finally the year where you may not need to do that. Hernandez has shown he can hang at the major league level. Hopefully, they have more trust in Aaron Bummer and Dylan Lee now, where they can feel like those guys can be higher leverage guys than what they got chances to do this year. We shouldn't see Dylan Lee optioned again for dumb reasons just to get another pitcher up. I feel like you've got plenty of options there. And that means you can focus on improving the roster in other areas. And we're going to go over all of that. I think tomorrow's show maybe might be a good one where we lay out the priorities for Atlanta. This is what we've got to work on. These are the big problem areas. But yeah, the season's over. This is a bummer. Like I said, I'm not disappointed. I'm a little frustrated that it ended offensively I'm not going to say as quietly as it did. I feel like you finally got on the board in game 2, right? You got 4 runs on the board, but this is not the offense, and it hasn't been all year, that we thought Atlanta was capable of. And it's frustrating that you saw a lot of the same problems come up last night that you've seen all year. Atlanta didn't get many guys in scoring position, but when they did, they went 0-4 in that. They went 0-4. They didn't get any hits with runners in scoring position. They left 3 on base, and it's a continuation of what we've seen all year, and you've got to fix it, and I don't quite know how.
Yeah, that bottom of the order, as you mentioned earlier, 6 through 9 was 1 for 14 last night. The only one was that Orlando Arcia hit in the 8th inning, which, for the record, I was screaming at my TV saying, "Why is Orlando Arcia still in the game in the 8th inning, batting in this situation?" And he made
And
a
then he got a
liar out
hit,
of me.
and
Made
then
a
he got a
liar
hit.
out of me, Lindsay,
God,
and became a run too with the Michael Harris homer. And can we talk about Michael Harris for a minute? What has he
golly.
done? I mean, since he's came back from injury, he's been great, but especially in September, I think 923 OPS in September. And then this playoffs, he's been absolutely insane. Obviously, the team MVP of the wild card round was 3 for 4 last night, 2 RBIs. That home run in the 8th showed that this team was not giving up. This team that have had no quit in them, even though they knew their backs were against the wall in the elimination game. They knew
Mhm.
they were going home if they didn't win that game. He did everything that he could in his power to do that. And that home run was beautiful too. Off one of the hottest relievers in baseball right now as well.
Jason
So
Adam. Yeah.
which is that bullpen of San Diego is nasty, is very nasty. Having Musgrove go out with an injury didn't really change the toughness to the pitching squad of what the Braves had to deal with because that bullpen is very nasty with Estrada, Tanner Scott, Adam, and then of course Suarez at the end.
Brian
But Mike,
Hoeing coming in. Brian Hoeing didn't have his shoes on when Joe Musgrove left. He had to put his shoes on, jogged out to the mound, got a few minutes to warm up, and then just shut down Atlanta for a couple innings. It's nuts.
it's crazy. Yeah. But Michael Harris
Yeah.
deserves all the credit in the world. I'm excited to talk more about him in the offseason because, as I've mentioned a few times on this show, I think we truly may have a competition. And this is not a bad ploy towards Acuna, but I think we might have a competition of who is the leadoff guy next year for this Braves offense. And I think that's a good problem to have.
Yeah. He was 1 for 27 in his postseason career entering this series. He goes 5 for 8 with a home run, a double, 2 runs, 2 RBI, and only 1 strikeout, which I think was big there. He's never drawn a walk in the postseason in his career. He's doing everything else right now. So, in just a second, we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about what happened. We're going to talk more about the next steps and kind of the big takeaways from this year and what we've learned as a whole. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby, Christian Rauh. Reminder, you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Crosby Baseball. He's at Christian S. Rauh. The show, Braves_Today. I don't think I've ever mentioned that on here, but Braves_Today. We tweet out the graphics, pod clips, articles that we write on the Braves Today Substack at bravestoday.com. We're just, everything's Braves Today, folks, okay? Everything's branded that way. But I think this year, the big takeaway for me on the offense, I'm going to start with the offense first before we do the pitching. I think the big takeaway on the offense first is you always have to be evaluating what you're doing, and you always have to be finding ways to be better. You can never rest on your laurels of, hey, we're a pretty good offense. Yes, we tied the major league record for home runs in the season last year. You turn around this year and they ended up being pretty decent, but you combine some awful batted ball luck earlier in the year with MLB adjusting to what you do. And there's a great tweet from The Athletic. Folks who have read my stuff before, and I'm a big fan of Saris. I met him at the winter meetings last year. Super nice guy. Could not be any more helpful. But he was talking about Atlanta didn't see a ton of fastballs last year. I think there was like the 18th most fastballs in the league. And so it was easy for Atlanta's hitters to sit on breaking stuff. And to an extent, we saw Philly do this against Mr. Strider last year. They sat slider. And if you're sitting on the slider, all you have to do is be able to foul off the fastball and wait for a slider. And Atlanta saw a lot of breaking pitches last year and not nearly as many fastballs. And they didn't see a lot of lefties last year. Atlanta led the league in fewest plate appearances against lefty starters of any team in baseball. Teams were setting their rotations to not send their lefties up against Atlanta. This year, we saw the league adjust, and they really ramped up the fastballs to the Braves, but specifically throwing them down in the zone. So they saw the third most low fastballs. They weren't all four-seamers. The traditional rules here, you want to elevate a four-seamer, and then your breaking pitches will break down or laterally out of the zone. Atlanta saw a lot of low fastballs, both sinkers, where you normally would throw a sinker or a two-seamer, and four-seamers. And what that does, and this is what a thing the league is learning, what that does is that changes the sights of the hitters. It takes them longer to differentiate between the fastball and the slider, because you can't just rely on the fact that the pitch elevated is probably a fastball and the pitch down is probably a slider. Instead, you have to wait for the pitch to actually start breaking. And by then, typically, you're going to be late, or you're already going to be firing into the zone, and that breaking ball is going to go below the zone. They became one of the worst teams in baseball at hitting sliders. They were second best last year because they were able to sit on it and wait for it. And now, sixth worst in the regular season at hitting sliders, because it takes longer to differentiate between a low fastball and a slider. And you already don't have a lot of time to make that decision and pull the trigger. And
especially with that high velocity in the league now that just keeps growing and growing, you have even less time. So yeah.
Yeah. And so you have to continue to evolve. And I don't know exactly what Atlanta is going to do. I'm really curious to see how that works in the offseason. That isn't just something where you can just tell guys, hey, get better at that, right? This is going to be a concentrated effort to improve this. And I'm curious to see what happens. And I'm curious to see if teams continue doing this or if they change what they do against Atlanta next year in anticipation of Atlanta making a change. But that kind of explains a little bit of it. We
Yeah.
saw guys adjust. Matt Olson was nuclear in the back half. He batted over 300 the month of September. His OPS was in the 900s in both August and September. He came close to getting back to some of those milestones that we expected of him in the regular season. And I do want to also give him credit. He did finish his third consecutive season of playing all 162 games. He has the most consecutive starts at first base since Pete Rose did it for the Phillies a long time ago. And he is currently the MLB leader in consecutive games played. The last time he missed a game was midway through the 2021 season when he was with Oakland. Shout out to Matt Olson for fixing a lot of that stuff there. He finished with 98 RBI, just shy of 100. Would have been his fourth consecutive year with 100 RBI and finished with 29 homers. So again, just barely missed a 3,100 season by one homer and two RBI.
That new Iron Man for the Atlanta Braves.
There you go. Okay, I talked about the offense a bit. Any thoughts on Atlanta's offense this year and some of what you saw and maybe what we should be watching for over the offseason and into next year?
Yeah, I like what the thing you brought up, and I think that shows two different things that could happen. And I think that you could obviously show adjustments, just like Matt Olson showed, or it could change with roster construction. I don't know if you're going to take that route, but that's a possibility, right? So it's something to keep in
Yeah,
mind. But the biggest thing I shouted about all season long, Lindsay, was the peaks and valleys of this offense, ups
yeah,
and downs of this offense, how they couldn't stay consistent. And I thought that was a really big thing that needs to be adjusted. Obviously, injuries, the way that they had their roster set up at the end was a big deal. But one thing that I noticed a lot, and I know you kept track of this as well, is that they hardly changed their lineup. And I think that's something that Brian Snicker likes to do. He doesn't like to change his lineup, but when you have these woes in your offense, just shaking up the lineup a little bit might be smart. And we saw that right into the very end. We talked about how Ozzy struggled in game one of the world's or of the wild card round. And he was still batting second in game two, right? So just making a little bit of shakeups, I think could have changed the aspect of maybe a couple wins in that game. Who knows? Or just installed some confidence or lit a fire under a couple players in the regular season. But we didn't really get that. A little bit of takeaways from there is obviously the momentum, the peaks and valleys. And I would have liked to see some shakeups with the rotation, or excuse me, the batting lineup a little bit more this season.
yeah. Atlanta really doesn't like to change their orders. I'm sorry, their lineups and orders. A lot of their guys play every day, and that's something the teams. What was it? What was the final total here? I have this. They used 68 different lineups this year. That's just offensive. That's not pitcher. 68 different lineups this year. That is significantly more than usual. Last year, when they had some really good health, they used a grand total of 41 different lineups, and their most common used, the only difference was the catcher, and those two combined for 82 of the 162 games. So in half of their games, they ran out the exact same lineup minus whichever catcher was in there. This year, their most common used lineup in the regular season was used 14 times, and their most common one was 9 times. And that just shows you, like, because of the injuries, because of all the replacements, of everything they had to do, they didn't have the offensive consistency that you're looking for. And if the lineup's not working out, you don't need to play the same guys every day. Move some guys around, give some guys days off and things like that. And we saw a little bit of it when you had a little better health. I remember Orlando Arcia before the tooth issue randomly getting a day off, and they put, I think it was Nacho Alvarez at short, just trying to like and just trying to give him a day, but like it didn't happen that often. And of your games at shortstop, he played 156 of those out of your grand total of 162. So that, by the way, Orlando Arcia, definitely a thing we're going to talk about tomorrow. Don't worry, that's
Oh,
coming in
sure.
tomorrow's show. Yeah, pitching wise, I think the big takeaway for me from this season is you can never have enough pitching, starting pitching specifically, and you can never have enough high quality pitching. We saw Atlanta go to extreme measures trying to give their starters additional rest this year, right? We saw Atlanta, most of their guys had not gone on regular rest until the month of August. They were giving guys extra days. They were spot starting with different guys. The Braves ended up using 13 different players as starters, and they did not have a single game where they went with a reliever as an opener, right? They did have relievers make spot starts. Ray Kerr started twice. Grant Holmes got 7, things like that. But they went with 13 different relievers. The issue is outside of your top guys, your Morton, your Sale, your Fried, your Lopez, your Schwellenbach, the rest of those guys didn't do very well. That was the issue. The lowest ERA you had in there was Grant Holmes. Everybody else was at least, correction, AJ Smith-Shawver's regular season start was scoreless. It was, what was it, 4? I think it was 4 1/3 innings against the Cubs, scoreless. Everybody else, though, Alan Winans would have a 15 ERA. Darius Vines had an 8.5. Ray Kerr had a 5.6. And so Elder had a 6.5. And so you need more high quality starters to make it through the regular season, because if you change 5 of those spot starts, or that 6th spot in the rotation, if you change 5 of those from losses into wins, then this postseason might go differently, because you don't have to play a doubleheader on Monday. You don't have to run out the A lineup all weekend, the final week of the year, trying to fight for a playoff spot. And then in the postseason, if you have more high quality options, and I'm not saying they lost because of AJ Smith-Shawver. They lost because the offense didn't hit, but you can never have enough pitching. And so for the people that continue to insist Atlanta needs to trade pitchers away to reinforce other parts of the roster, I personally feel like the Braves have done the right thing by committing over 60% of their bonus pool to pitching. And I think you need to develop as many high quality starting pitching options as you can. And these guys really should not be traded away unless you are convinced it's going to be something where they're not going to work out at the major league level, like a Darius Vines, like an Alan Winans, and you can get a little bit of extra value out of them by trading them before other teams realize that.
Or potentially a Bryce Elder. I'm gonna throw his name in that one as well, because I know he's such a polarizing name in this one. But I will say that when we're talking about this pitching, I'm gonna keep mine short. You talked
Okay.
about the knee and things like that, but what I'm gonna say is that out of all of these things that happened to this team this year, even though if we might not get Max Fried back, the future is bright for the Atlanta Braves pitching staff. With Spencer Schwellenbach, what we got from Grant Holmes, even though these young guys like Smith-Shawver and Waldrop didn't have their best looking when they came up for the first times, I have a lot of faith in them. And that's just the first wave. You got another wave of young guys coming up. Cam Caminetti was just drafted. He's going to be very fun. We're going to talk about him a lot on bravestoday.com for the foreseeable future, Lindsay. But I think that there is a lot to be excited about with this pitching staff, with the young core that's coming up. So even though they need some depth, I think the depth is on its way, and we're going to see it happen here.
Yeah, plenty of things to like about. We're going to, like you said, break it down, bravestoday.com. We're going to have stuff. We're going to have stuff here on the pod. So stick with us during the off season. Thank you to everybody who's been here so far. I know we changed things during the year as far as changing, whether it's changing hosts, changing the formats, things like that. But this is, we're going to keep going in the off season. We are not done. Again, thank you to everybody who's been here with us. If you're listening on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. Bleav is really happy with the growth of the show and how the show is doing. So thank you all for that. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell when we drop the next episode. Because again, we are back tomorrow talking more about, we're going to do the off-season to-do list. This is what the Braves need to work on. This is what the Braves, is the areas of improvement, the roster decisions you have to make, all of that. The off-season is starting now, and we will have everything we can do for you right here on Braves Today.